So I'll call this meeting to order. For those who knew I was traveling, I am no longer traveling, as I was going to visit my mom in Miami to find out I'm not allowed to go into her facility. So, oh no, better, I was going to go back down there in end of May, so I was able to transfer my American Airlines tickets to May, and actually I'm getting a voucher because it costs less, which is even better. Who cares? So, anyway, all right. What I have sent out, in most cases, there's about 3 or 4 that are still outstanding. The buddy lists, and I will send that out to everyone else. Martha and Iris, you're working with Paul and Frank, and I'm actually gonna, the one other little section you had, I think it's either that or with Jim and Taylor. So I have to just double check on that. There's was 1 or 2 areas which we did not have coverage on. Let's see, I wrote it down. Glasses.
I got an extra pair in case you need them.
This is really.
I put them all over. I'll have like small. 2 in my vest. So I might have 2 right here. And
okay, we have a split on that. That one's okay. I think one was the grants and revenue, and I think I'm going to do it. I have to speak to Burke, but if anybody else wants to go on grants and revenue with us, let us know, and I can add you to that. This was organized at some time today. Yeah, no, there's more than what we had here. We have general and miscellaneous, which is employee benefits, risk management, and contingency. Is anybody interested in pursuing those wonderful things?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay.
What was that again? General what?
spoken like a true volunteer.
It's called general and miscellaneous. It's employee benefits, risk management, which is the insurances, and contingency. And the contingency consists of 2 contingencies: the Board of Finance contingency and the accrual for union contracts.
Okay.
So that's with Taylor and Jim. General government, we have that. Planning and zoning, we have that. Let me ask, did I send out, were you doing P&Z? All right, so I sent that email out. Okay, good, all right. I didn't bring my other document that I had with it. Public Works, there's a section called Human Services, which is Human Services, Senior Center, Youth Services, and Public Health Department. Okay, fine.
We have volunteers.
Yeah, Louisa will do that. That's with Jim and Taylor on that. Going from there. Okay.
Jack, I'll add, if you need any help, if you don't, no worries, grants and revenue.
Okay. Yeah, this is Bert's birthday weekend.
Whoa.
Bert's birthday month.
No, just a weekend. And so.
Monday to Monday.
Actually, it was Friday. but his son's in from California, so that's where Bert is tonight. And then some other people had sniffles, or as one person responded, I was diagnosed with a sinus infection, and I've never been so happy to have a sinus infection.
On grants and revenue, who are you lined up with? Board of Finance?
Who am I lined up with? Jay-Z and Frank. And I'm going to be, I told Frank's the sole person on treasurer, and I'm gonna meet with Frank and Joan. Just be the two of us. And I'm hopeful that Joan also bought some lottery tickets, because predicting a 50 basis point drop when she did was, you know, amazing. As I told to Taylor and Jen and some people outside, I am writing a complaint letter to Fed Chairman Powell, just because I hate being wrong. But, all right, so just a quick overview, and then those who have done the buddy system before can add to it. Matter of fact, since she's nodding, she's going to do a lot of this meeting today. How have you, Stacy's been on police for some time. So, and in the past you worked with Jamie McLaughlin and Rob Cordone. Rob Cordone was, prior to him being on the Board of Finance, was vice chair of this committee for the Board of Selectmen side, and was here when we instituted the buddy system. So he's, you know, fully on board on that. So explain how it works, and what you don't do and what you do.
Yep, so we typically reach out to each other and find a meeting time where we can get together, and we just sort of talk about what the police budget is, what they've said at Board of Selectmen budget meetings, our questions, our concerns, and we sort of try to come to, we talk to each other and we come to sort of a consensus on what our agreed questions, comments, and concerns are, and we bring them to Kate Bush and Jen Charneski. Sometimes that's been where we all meet with them and have a conversation. Sometimes it's just been, if it's just a couple of questions or whatever, it's just been an email. The Board of Finance leads it, but always copies us on it and their questions and get answers. So most recently, we didn't know that Dan Bumgardner was also assigned to police, but we had.
He was being copied.
Yes. Yes, he was, but he missed, but because when we met already, Elisa, myself, and Rob Cardone had lunch, we had a conversation, we talked about our questions, comments, and concerns, and then we found out that Dan was added, so we quickly caught him up, and then Rob checked in with us and said, okay, I'm getting ready to send my questions to Kate, these are my questions, do you guys have anything to add? And so that's sort of how it's worked for us in the past in the police. And then I know that I've been added to fire, so it's my first time on fire this year. So John Zagroski said that he would be getting us some dates to get together soon. So.
On some of the items, and just remind me, I want to talk about a project that I spoke to John about. So I may need some people to work with me during the day, because I'd like to get the project done as quickly as possible so we can present to the Board of Finance this project. It is consistent with what we've been doing on the balance sheet, and it's working on the capital accounts. I have not met with Kate or Jen yet, but it would be as an example. Right now, the 3 fire departments and the police department have small capital items, which makes a lot of sense. It doesn't have to go. They still report to the, to the town administrator what they're going to be purchasing. But when I looked at this, I saw that some of these accounts currently had 200% of what we have, what the average funding was. Not one of them was under 150% of the average funding over the last 2 years. As such, what my suggestion on this 4 items will be is to set them up as an imprest account, so that, and whatever that dollar amount we can discuss, but let's just say $15,000 for the 3 fire departments, $20,000 for the police, and then while they still have to report into the town administrator of what's going on, that the funds be treated as an imprest account, like, you know, the old petty cash. So that's their number, they hold still, and instead of taking taxpayer money to fund them at various amounts, that whenever they spend it, it gets refilled by using the Board of Finance contingency. So if in fact we go with that, there's potentially a $20,000 savings on reducing those fund balances, and another $46,000 this year, which the Board of Selectmen had proposed to put into those accounts. We're at over $1 million in the Board of Finance Reserve Fund for Capital Non-Recurring Expenses contingency. And the project is going to be looking at all of these numbers and making some suggestions on contingency or items that have been funded, but projects aren't going for another 3 years, and taking that money back in, and then having the Board of Finance potentially have some guidelines similar to what they did on the general fund of how to use that money. $1 million is a lot of money, especially since the new capital project approach that, Martha, you've been part of almost now, you're on your second one, but if we look at how the Public Works Garage was done, and the contingencies that are put in there, and as well as some estimates and how we're doing it for the larger projects, as well as the fact that should they be going over, the goal is to notify the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Ed, the Board of Finance, and the RTM sooner rather than later. So we shouldn't be needing large amounts of contingency because of what we're now, how we're now operating. And there's also, in my count, someplace in the neighborhood of about 5 or 6 different contingency funds within that, in addition to the Board of Finance overall contingency. They closed one of those out in their last meeting. So it's looking at all those, looking at every project, and coming and saying, does this one stay or does it go? And what's the total dollar amount, and here's our proposal, you know, and we'll be doing it jointly with the Board of Finance.
You might want to ask Kate, because I think the Board of Finance now has a procedure in terms of capital projects, and, you know, how
Well,
long they sit on the books, and they go out to them and ask them.
I understand, but without getting into like detail, there's one of the things that the Board of Selectmen was doing, and I believe they stopped, was if they knew they were like putting in the gas lines for the fire departments, they would accrue that amount for 3-4 years, and then when the project was ready to go, all the money was there. And the concept was basically, and it had been done for like this forever, concept was to level out your capital requests. So one of them are going this year, and there's 2 amounts. One is 60, one is 80. And one of those amounts will be used this year, but they still have either 60 or 80,000 sitting out there, and it's not going to be done for yet another year. So in the Board of Ed side, if we want to have transparency and consistency, when they're ready for a project, they come forward with it. Now, that doesn't work all the time, because there were like 7 window projects that they then merged together on the Board of Ed side. But for the most part, that's potentially $60,000 that can come back into contingency and use this year for payments, and then when the project's ready, if it's a $250,000 project, it's a $250,000 project. So that's the type of guidelines that we're looking over. But you're right, they do now look twice a year at all projects that are active or inactive. They get a report on where it is, whether or not it can be closed out, and anything, I believe, over 18 months, they start asking whether or not this is even gonna go. Right, right. Which was something that the Board of Finance recently did, which I think was a great initiative.
You know, Jack, at the end of the day, when we're through with all this review, the balance of the funds, it'd be kind of interesting to relate the balance of the funds to potential mill rate impact. Stuff from the funds, you know, has, you know, have some relation to the mill rate, that's all. You know.
Well, I think if we go back to the review of the funds that we had done previously, I think we contributed about $400,000 to $500,000 from assigned to unassigned, and some of that was used to pay down, to call the debt that was there. So that had a mill rate impact. In addition, there was probably about another, I'm going to say, $100,000 of capital that wasn't put into the budget because we had accounts such as Cherry Lawn still had some accounts, so they were able to do that. There was maybe 25,000 funds to be used for Wheat Beach, and they were able to use it and apply it to the capital that they had there. We had a $10,000 town cemetery fund that has been able to be used to help clean up the cemeteries that had been there for a really, really long time. And with all due respect, some of it is because we just didn't have the documentation, and so we were able to go back and find some. And the other side of it is, and I've said this in the past, you know, the town's a $35 million business, and it's being run with 3 to 4 accountants. And that's not a lot for that size business. So to do the extra projects and other things like that, it's having the resources to be able to do that. And so our job is to position ourselves as that resource, as you will did, you know. So, but yes, it has a mill rate impact. So, anyway, I'm sorry. So I'm going to be going and meeting on some of the capital conversations with each of the Board of Finance members on some of those things, general government, police and fire. I'm going to just come in on the capital side.
Jack, when you have those capital conversations, are those the here and the now, or are those the projected capital expenditures?
Here and now.
Okay.
Now,
Do you care about the,
future,
we all care about the future, do you care about the future?
I do care about the future of establishing certain parameters and guidelines,
Perfect.
right, for which can then be operated from the people that are very capable in doing this. But understand, I'd say, you know, since the shuffle, and definitely over the last 5 years, there's been several changes that have been implemented by the Board of Finance. They now have a report on all bonding to know what's still outstanding on the bonds, so that, you know, you have, I believe, 18 months from when the approval is or something that from the Board of Finance and the RTM to then go and implement. And if you're still waiting for certain things, which one time the state wasn't getting back to us on time, so we never bonded that. So that had to be cleaned up. And Darien does not typically, and you can add to this, we don't do bond anticipation notes, which I understand Greenwich does a lot of.
Right.
So if you don't have, bond anticipation note would allow you to do 1 year out, and then when you had all that data, then you roll it into your real bond that you're doing. So we would have complied, and then when that 1 year note comes in, we're reissuing and other things like that. And I don't think Darien has done that in the
I think it did in
past.
the past one time that I remember.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
that's,
but it's not
it's,
common.
yeah, it's not common for us, so, but, so those are the things that, I'd rather parameters, because I don't want to have anyone have to do this again. If it's just a standard report, and now it's part of the management of what goes on, and that's what I think we're looking for. Now, what the level has to be and other things like that, we can recommend, but for the most part, it's the Board of Finance purview. And on the reserve accounts, when we looked at them, our committee got a lot of credit in what we recommended, quite honestly, and you were in some of those meetings. It was, Jen said, what do you want to do? And I said, this is your company. What do you propose we do? And that was our recommendation. You know, because quite honestly, Kate and Jen have a better understanding of where they would want to move it than we're going to. And that's what we did. So if she wanted in capital, went to capital. If she wanted the operating budget, went into operating budget. So, continue, I'm sorry that I cut you off.
I think I was done with the buddy system.
Does anybody else, I mean, Martha, you've done it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's pretty standard.
We keep on this budget, I know that there's temptation to ask about other projects or other initiatives that we've heard about, but it's to review this budget. And so, anything that they've done in the past, that can be a little bit of an open game, because, and in fact, you should know that we are anticipating, we are hopeful for an update on Highland at either our April or May RTM meeting. It was one of the things that we discussed at rules. It's just, there's still some information, and we never want to put a town employee where they have to come back the next month because they don't have the information today. They're going to have it next month. Give it to us when you have it next month, So, is there any general comments on the Board of Selectmen budget?
Just one question back on the buddy system. Things to make sure you do, or things to make sure you avoid? Because Jenny and I met with our buddies, and it was a great back and forth. But I went in a little blind as far as what I should or should not do, so any insights would be, from you or Martha, would be much appreciated.
I'm sure you did a great job. I'm sure it was fine. I'm sure you did a
At
great job.
a minimum, Jenny did. I took credit for it, so.
I'm sure
We also put you with somebody who fully understands what the buddy system is.
Yes, yes, thank goodness.
They were with Rob.
Yeah, I got it.
Because
Oh.
Rob
It was great, yeah.
Rob has Dan, who's a newbie to this as well.
Yeah, no, Rob's great.
Yeah, Rob is
Actually, I
very.
had a question to ask. The 30,000 for the concession,
Yeah,
where does that,
that's in our list of questions.
okay.
It was kind of not too long of a list, but, where'd the number come from? It's a two-pronged question, like, the first step is, the first question is really, are we sure the town wants to get in the restaurant business? Do we own any existing, equipment? Have we thought through, like, all the pieces of it? And then, moreover, what is the cost of not doing it? Are we doing it because we want control over the vendor? Are we doing it, and I don't know what the answer, I have no bias to the answer other than, I think, and sometimes when you're talking in public, you have to ask the obvious questions so that it's out and people can hear the answer.
Right.
So just questions on where did the 30,000 come from? What are the, have we really thought about all the costs involved, and really what's the cost of not doing it?
And have they done the research and what's the game?
Right.
Yeah,
What's the game plan? What are you looking at the HVAC or the exhaust system? Are you looking at all that other stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer could be check, yes, we've already done it, that's great, but at least we had a chance to ask those questions. And
watching some of the, listening to the meetings and the discussion about this, a couple thoughts came to my mind. That is that I understand why they're doing it. They want to increase the bidding. They want to have more vendors bidding. And the thing that seems a little tenuous to me is that it's like the increased bids, it will serve as kind of a proxy for increased fees to the town. But it's also a proxy for the underlying question was, what's the demand there? And no one really knows the demand.
right.
In other words, you could have a vendor coming in, submitting a bid, we accept it, and find out the demand's not there, and then the next year we're at square one again.
Well, going back to like the 30,000 on what's the equipment, and is
Yeah.
that the equipment, like, are you locking into a certain kind of,
Yes.
business model, right? And now you're kind of in the restaurant business of a certain kind. I don't know what the answer is. That's for them to.
But just kind of
Yes.
continue the thought, the last thought I had was that it almost, and then I heard, the concept of going to hire a consultant,
Right.
$5,000. That's good, But it's just, thinking about it a little more is that it's kind of more of a timing thing, that let's assume we get the answers to the 30,000, and we have the consultant. It just seems this point about being so tenuous that perhaps maybe we spend the 5,000, that's the cost for the consultant. We go out to bid, we find out once we find out the bid interest and really testing all these theories, if we really can satisfy ourselves that this is a bid that's grounded on demand, solid bid, whatever, for a number of years, then we go out and commit and buy the equipment.
Totally agree.
So it's a timing issue, really.
And we brought that up.
And that's what we posted to them, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you read what we said?
No.
I just shared it with Jack. I can certainly share.
No, I'm just-
Yeah, I can share it with
No,
the rest of
totally.
the committee.
That
I
makes
just
so much
was trying
sense.
to.
Part of it, and I think part of the conversation is, do you have, pardon me for using the term, but like a Mr. Softy ice cream machine there? Well, or don't you? Yeah, because that determines what's going on there.
Right.
And is there standard stuff? So I looked at your questions and,
Or is there a cappuccino machine going in? That's what I don't know.
Oh, really?
That's right. There you go.
It's not-
Coffee at 7 a.m.
You're a chicken finger guy. Do
So,
not go to cappuccino.
It's really more the 30,000. I'd like to know where that came from, like why that.
So you
number.
don't have an answer?
No, and that's the process we're in. We're
Okay,
gonna
you're,
find out.
right, okay.
So that's really for the Board of Finance to sort of think about, because in the category of, I think that's what the process will unveil is, we know, the 30,000 is gonna be for a grill and a refrigerator and a freezer, like we know exactly what it's going, but if it's like sort of, we think it's about 30,000.
I can't remember just attending one of these meetings. I thought they had sort of looked at what equipment was currently there.
Yeah.
Although I heard some
I
discussion
agree,
about
I
an
agree.
ice cream machine that had been.
Right, that's
why I
in a
mentioned
number
that.
of flavors. So maybe it has some basis, but one of my questions would be if we get further down the road and we are gonna follow this is, why couldn't we buy what's there used? And would it really be,
Good question. Yeah,
That is a good question.
yeah.
good.
You guys get to answer that.
Yes.
Or ask that. Now, I will say, please, just a little clarification. While this is the Board of Finance's ultimate review, the concept for the Board of Finance is to also understand where F&B is coming from. So that, eventually, each one of these committees will be coming back and reporting to us, but not after the Board of Finance votes, before. And one of the things that we've done in the past, which I would hope that we do again this year, is to go through each of the capital, proposed capital, and have a sense of a meeting if anyone is uncomfortable with it. So that, and don't think that didn't matter. It was Deb Ritchie, myself, and Dennis Maroney that pulled back the cafeteria expansion because we were not happy with the numbers. And good thing we did, because it came in about $600,000 more than they had in the budget. We questioned whether or not a slate roof was necessary for 35 Leroy as opposed to just a regular roof. That saved the town, and again, with Deb Ritchie, that saved the town $150,000 because Dr. Brenner said, I don't care. So, you know, that's the purpose to go through this. We would like the Board of Finance to know if we do have an issue, that they know about it before they're voting. So, you know, so that my overall plan would be, and we'll have to wait to see if the state's going to be creating some problems again this year. But the overall view is that in theory, about 10 minutes after the Board of Finance votes on the budget, that this committee's ready to vote. Because we've already explained, we've done all of our work, and, you know, Bill, you were on before. The committee used to be that we waited for the Board of Finance, and then we did all the work. Well,
Right, too late.
Yeah.
because if we're then bringing something out, it's either a gotcha, or why are you first telling me now?
Right.
You know?
Well, I'm happy to, Bob and I can share our questions with all of you. I was trying to give the Board of Finance, our buddies, the first
View.
and but happy to let you guys see it and percolate in it, and if you have any other.
Right, so that's the other thing, just I want everybody to know is that you guys are gonna be reporting back. So you have like a book report here.
Yes.
But I would say it was a good meeting in
Yeah.
terms of, you know, the back and forth, and which
have
is
very
exactly,
good-
I
we
think,
have
I
very
mean,
good
you want,
memories.
clearly, we
Yeah.
want it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because, look, that's why we call it the buddy system. It's a whole team approach.
Yeah.
That's the way we're hopeful that it works.
And that was their mindset, going, I think, I mean,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Stacy, just a couple questions I had, think about the areas we'll be focusing on the fire and the police department, just again, looking at the meetings, the discussions. One is kind of this year budget, and I think it's maybe more of a non-budget for this year, maybe out there, but on the non-budget item there was some mention about the 3 volunteer departments and the idea of consolidating them and purchasing and the like, and it all makes sense, but I think almost in that same discussion, there was, I think Kate mentioned the idea, maybe we ought to have a fire administrator. And that to me, I mean, I just kind of thought then jumped to a full-time employee. And if that comes up, I don't think it's this budget, but it just seems like it would just kind of beg the question about maybe perhaps instead of hiring somebody, looking at maybe what the commission does in lieu of hiring somebody, and having commission kind of oversee some kind of consolidated purchasing, or perhaps the fire marshal doing so. I just questions strictly as just, I don't know the answers to the backgrounds historically of those 2 functions, but instead of a full-time employee.
Well, they're
It's on my
different,
list.
they're,
Okay.
each one of them are different organizations,
Okay.
legal organizations. And I believe they may be 503C type of organizations, because, you know,
They
if any.
solicit donations.
Well, yeah, they do
So
solicit
it's,
donations, but also for anybody who's listening who may want to support your local fire department, you can sign up for that fire department on Amazon if you happen to make purchases there. Because I believe all of them happen to be there. Go ahead.
Then the other question, which I think is a budget item, has to do with the, you know, with the civilian dispatchers it may come up for discussion last year and again this year. The idea was to free up time for the officers to work in other areas and all. And I think that teed up in the discussion this year about the chief doing a deployment report. And I believe in the last discussion, the Board of Finance, there was some mention, I think the chief had said that he was going to maybe have that deployment report in time for the Board of Finance's consideration.
So that came out of the meeting with Rob, Lisa, and myself. So Rob, when he was on F&B, we were both on police together, and then when he when he took over for, I believe, Bruce Orr, he stayed on police, because Bruce Orr also did police with us. And so he's been looking at this for at least as long as I have. And so we have always had a lot of questions about civilian dispatch. And we've asked for a lot of data about civilian dispatch. One year we got more information than other years, but the deployment report came out of that. We also asked for a call log to see how often calls are coming in. That's what we have gotten in the past, but we didn't get last year, and we don't have this year. So Rob will be asking for that. Rob and Dan, sorry. So I just wanted to clarify one thing that Mrs. Stevenson said at the Board of Finance meeting when she presented the budget. She said that adding the last three of the plan for the civilian dispatch would free up so that we could have a narcotics officer. That was last year's plan. What the chief said at the Board of Selectmen meeting was that because they had a bunch of retirements and promotions, they are still hiring to replace the retirements, so they're not at full force yet, so they can't have a narcotics officer yet until they're at full force. So this last bit of the plan for civilians dispatch had a 9-person plan, and so this is the last stage of it. This last stage will release the last police officer who's still on dispatch at night. That's what this does. I just wanted to clarify that.
But that being said, I believe that Jamie's the one who requested, as part of this civilian dispatch, the deployment from the chief. So, you know, they did not get it at the Board of Selectmen prior to the vote. And I know that that's very important because, you know, in police departments, you can always be down people. But the commitment was to have a full-time narcotics officer who could then interact with the other local departments on various things, and therefore it's a consistent person, consistent body.
Right, but technically if we were at full force, we could have already had that, because that was from last year's budget. This year's budget, so last year's budget was to free up 2 police officers. One was planned to be an SRO at the middle school, and one was planned for a narcotics officer. We haven't been at full force, that's why we don't have the narcotics officer yet. This last stage just releases the last police officer who's doing the night dispatch.
Right, but I think...
So they hadn't fully implemented 3 civilians yet, is that what you're saying?
Right.
Right.
This
is the last stage of it, of the 9.
The last one. This is the night shift.
This is the last stage of the 9.
But I think that was part of the reason why Jamie requested the deployment. And that is because we don't want to hear next year that we're still down 1 staff person, and hence, and Jamie has said, especially with the potential that legalized pot may be occurring, she doesn't want to find that we are still waiting for that 1 person because somebody else retired or somebody left for another force. So there comes a time where the police department's going to have to bite the bullet and give the narcotics officer, you know, so.
That's it.
But yes, Dan asked that during
Board of Finance meeting.
Board of Finance. Board of Ed.
Oh, wait,
Okay,
back to
keep going.
police. I was just thinking about it. My thought, I mean, they replace the vehicles every 3 years now, and there's a big upfit charge. They didn't specify what it is, I'm curious what it is. And I wonder, do they maintain maintenance logs? You know, they have a mechanic shop on all their vehicles. I would just sort of like to see what kind of maintenance takes place. I mean, maybe this is a longer term thing to look at in terms of how frequently we replace them, but
What did
some-
they used to be before?
it was 2 years,
So now it's 3.
Yeah.
now it's 3. And it's been 3 for quite a
Right,
while.
but part of the, I do believe the chief did give some response to that.
Yeah.
And I
Okay,
believe
missed that.
what he said, but I still think that you should request the log, but
Yeah.
it's not necessarily just the miles they're doing
No,
or
it's
things.
engine hours.
It's the engine hours that they're running and how many times they get in and out of doors.
Yeah.
Which, if they had my kids, we'd probably be. But yeah, it's, but how they're also managing the engine hours would be of interest.
Okay.
Anything else on any of the other?
Do you mind if I close the door? I can just hear a lot of cheering.
Yes, yes. You can close as long as that one's open.
Yeah.
Because this is an open meeting, the door has to be open. Go figure.
Not that the basketball or whatever it is, it doesn't sound exciting, but.
Board of Ed, I have a request in for the final modifications that were done. I know they're in that book that we handed out, but I like having a list of what was approved and what wasn't. As soon as I get it, I'll forward it to everyone. So I know Stacy was actively writing them all down during the time.
I have them too, I can
Were
email.
you able to find the bus line?
I, no,
Alright,
I think that was fake news.
alright, because it took me, I said to myself, if Stacy says it's there, I gotta find it. I felt like it was like Fox News.
No, I said, I heard
I
I
know,
had
I
it checked,
know,
so
I
that
know.
was fake news, fake news.
But I failed in my search, so.
It's been a long day.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe we should just end on that. No. All right. But interesting enough, I was surprised because Paul and Frank and Jay-Z are doing the Board of Ed budget. And I was surprised that Jim Palin and Taylor weren't there.
Yeah.
So, and they signed who they wanted to sign, just, I was a little surprised by that, because the questions that were forwarded to the Board of Ed came from those two individuals. Any general comments on the Board of Ed?
Looks good.
They're coming in at approximately 3.4. I would have preferred it to be about 3, or under 3.3, let's put it that way. But we'll have to see with what goes on. But, go ahead.
Two things, and my bad again. I couldn't find how if they changed it all the iPad, and then I couldn't find what they did with the IDEA program going forward.
So they kept, they didn't.
Which idea program?
Ninth grade.
Some of the
Ninth
ninth grade
grade.
classes,
Yeah,
the
okay,
sorry.
Achievers program.
Yep.
They're keeping it this year, they're gonna monitor enrollment for future
So
decisions.
it stays in the budget, yeah, so I couldn't see it change, okay.
Mhm.
And then the iPad, I
Stayed.
stayed,
I,
there's
I,
no change in that, okay.
I do want to give at least what I heard last year during last year's budget, which had a lot of questions this year. Last year, we were informed that there would be a potential $1 million reduction in expenses submitted for excess cost reimbursement, because either students were aging out or students were returning. We were also told, and this was addressed in, I believe, was it the October, November special ed presentation meeting, that the number of students have increased. So in theory, if you were looking at it, you would say, okay, if we're losing potentially $700,000 at a 70% return rate, we would still be ahead $300,000 in the overall special ed budget, because we didn't have to spend $1 million to get the $700,000. However, we were told that there was an increase in the number of students that were coming in and aging in, and most of them were not going to be over the reimbursement level. So where it appeared that there were a lot of questions being asked by the Board of Ed, that was the missing piece, that it doesn't matter who aged out, it's if you look at the number of students and what the costs of those students are, and remembering that the 4.5 times what the average cost is goes up every year a little bit, and potentially certain services change for students, or the cost of those students. I may have had a contracted speech therapist last year. This year I have an in-house speech therapist, and so the costs are going down, that the total expenses on the new students that came in or that were identified more than made up the $1 million expenses. They just weren't qualifying for necessarily for excess cost reimbursement.
So Jack, my takeaway then, what you're saying is that what counts is the mix of the children over and under the threshold, not the number of children in the program. It's the mix.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
how
both,
many
it's
then?
both.
Both,
It's the number of children plus the mix. So if our students increase, and then it matters what their classifications are, because I'm gonna use the wrong term, so correct me, Stacy. There are certain students who need more services than others. In the past, they used to be referred to as high needs. All right, are they still? So, I'm old. So, you know, with the high needs students, there's certain relationships that are there. So, in the past, one of the things that we used to get is what the overall major classifications were. We didn't want to know about 1 or 2 students, because that would potentially identify somebody. But even if you gave the split of the high needs, and then as an example, about 10 years ago, the autism was calculated to be 1 out of every 150 students. Then it went to 100 and 1 out of every 110. Then it went, and now it's either 100 or under. The Korean study actually had it 1 out of 60, because autism spectrum has grown in what it is, and so it has a wide range of not just, you know, of processing. Really, it's a processing issue. So according to that, one of the things that I used to do was, because we knew how many students were in the school that were identified as having autism, is that I would take that ratio, go it to the number of students that we had in the total school, and see if we were reasonably close. And contrary to people saying that people were just flying into Darien because they had it, we were quite honestly right in the
Right where you'd expect.
right within the standard deviation of where you would expect to have a 98 percentile, although I didn't do the standard deviation, but we were within that basic bell curve to saying we were reasonable based upon the number of students we had. So, I mean, that's where, yeah, and Mike, as you know, it's the mix of students, it's also the needs of what those students are.
Yes.
And then the number, because back a number of years, we had a high growth of students, but most of them were ADHD, which is, you know, if that's your basic disability, you know, it's not a high expense, you know, to support those students. That's what I'm saying. But that's consistent with what I believe Shirley showed, and correct me if I'm wrong.
No, she
or
showed in her
just-
presentation that our growth rate is similar to she showed the DERG's growth rate, and they're identifying that it's very similar.
Yeah, and at one time, there were also CETA reports that the state used to issue and publish. You can't get them anymore. But that had not only special ed, but it also had a breakdown of cost per district. Because that's one of the things we were talking about, is that one of the most meaningless numbers that anyone can present is what the average cost of a student is from town to town. Because if you go to, I believe, Weston, you have 4 schools. You don't need the same number of administrators if you have 7 schools. All right, the cost of heating those buildings are different. So there's a whole series of individual costs of what it is. And, you know, assuming the superintendents are all paid the same, if somebody's school population, which at one time I believe Ridgefield was declining, and Westport also, because I believe they closed certain schools. Well, the cost of that superintendent now just increased the cost of the average student, and it was simply without changing any number other than what we're paying the superintendent. So the CETA report gave you the details of the various component parts, and unfortunately you can't get them anymore. But the other thing, for those that missed it, the superintendent has informed the Board of Ed that he intends to put a bus there, predominantly servicing this.
really.
Yeah, right. I was about to say servicing this area. The Board of Education chose not to add money in the budget. Now, that probably means that there will be a real transfer from one part of the budget to pay for that bus. The concept of going after the Board of Finance votes on this budget, if they don't add that bus back in, they will have to find it within their existing budget. While it was said all we need to do is go to the Board of Finance, that's not necessarily true. Matter of fact, I'll be quite honest, it's not true. Because we in the RTM will be approving a total appropriation for the Board of Ed. Any additional funds increases that appropriation, which means it has to come back to the RTM. So if they believe that an $80,000 adjustment after we vote on the budget is just gonna be, we just show up at the Board of Finance and we're just gonna go to the RTM and ask for $80,000 for a total appropriation, my own personal opinion will be You have returned on average about 300,000. You are starting a budget year. Why don't you find it in your budget, and if you still are having difficulty with it, come back in March of the following year, and we'll consider funding that $80,000. So, I mean, I'm just expressing my own personal opinion, but I think that several other people feel the same way.
Tara said when she presented to the Board of Finance that they plan on finding the funds somewhere.
Right.
Question, so is this a permanent solution or just for until the construction?
No. First of all, they are looking, but they haven't decided, to expedite an overall study of busing, all right? So that will determine what the policies are and other things going forward. They have not they have put certain things down on the scope, but they have not voted on the scope. So I'm not going to comment on what it will or will not do, all right? But, and nor should we. But the superintendent said that if he was doing it in July, he was hopeful that the study would be done end of September, October. So if you look at just authorizing the expenditure of the $25,000, deciding the scope, putting it out to bid, they may be lucky that at the end of April, May, they're starting this study. Adding on 4 months to do this study, they're not going to have an answer until either this, August, September at best, because it's going to take some time. From that, the Board of Ed will make determinations if they're going to increase or decrease the walking area or not. While I believe there's been some excellent information put together by the parents, it's similar to what the average student cost is. In some of the towns where they were saying, you don't walk, as an example, I'm maybe minimalizing it, but you don't walk more than a quarter mile. It's because those towns don't have a sidewalk any place in them. So each town has to be looked at in relationship to what's going on. There is a concern if they add buses during construction that you'll never be able to take them away. And that's for the board to decide, not us. And the estimate was someplace in the neighborhood of about 600,000 to 700,000 if under the current rule, if they were to bring it back to 1.5.
Just that I run every day, like very early and to the Oak Ridge, and there seems that there's a study must be done because optimization can be done. A lot of these buses are with very few kids, and here you have so many kids that they should spend.
That's, you see, that's part of the interesting concept here, all right? We can look at a bus and say, oh, it's empty. But if you are outside of the range of where you're supposed to have a bus, every student is required to have a seat. So even if the bus is going half full, that student is still required to have a seat. Now, I remember when I was taking a law course, they were asking something about whether or not a parent could withhold visitation rights because the other parent wasn't paying their child support. And it was really a trick question. The real answer to find the case law was that the parent couldn't do it because the reciprocal of that is if a parent then moves out of state, which doesn't allow the other parent to see their children, then why should they pay? And the case law said, oh no, you have to pay all the time. So here's the reciprocal law to that. While it appears that in no place does it say specifically that children need to have a seat, state law does state that students are not allowed to stand in the bus when it's traveling. So optimization says that if you calculate that I'm going to put 110 students in there, 110% of the students in there because I want to optimize, and everybody ends up on the bus, you're in violation of state law because students might be standing and there's laws on how many students can fit into each of those seats. So the optimization, which everybody says, well, you know, those buses are empty, it's a little more complicated than just saying, well, they're only being used 50%, so we can consolidate the buses and go from there. That's all I'm saying is it's a,
Was the expense in the study?
yeah, hence the study.
Yeah, it seems to me if they shouldn't just study this out of town, they should study the whole
Yeah.
process.
I believe that's, the study is
Right.
the whole thing.
Okay, right, it shouldn't, yeah, I mean,
Right, it's,
there has to be some thinking outside of the box that
I
can
agree.
Yeah.
not make it a 600. Allow kids
Yeah.
that need to ride the bus,
It takes a long time.
and those early morning hours with all those backpacks and coldness, I mean, that will allow kids to ride the bus, but also not cost us $600,000.
well, and you know what?
It just seems that there should be some
So-
solutions.
Well, there
and again, I think
there
there
may be some solutions, but at the
Yeah.
end of the day, if it is determined that it costs us $600,000 because people want to have a 1.5 miles instead of a 2 mile, let's say for the high school, then you gotta accept the price to go with what you want. I mean,
Cost of doing business.
yep, you know, you can't say, well, I really want it to be 1 mile, but
But at least
I
we'll
don't
know
wanna-"
that that's what the cost is. Like right now, I feel like it's all,
No, they pretty much already did an analysis on that. Now, there's little things that people complain about, like, is it to the front door equal to 1 mile, so does that extra 50 feet put somebody within or not? Those are all the policies that the Board of Ed will have to, unfortunately, the Board of Ed will have to
Yeah,
deal
no,
with
no.
it as opposed to us. We'll just worry about what the costs are and, you know, what we're allowed to optimize based upon what state law allows. But, yeah, I believe that, you know, if everybody wants this, then, you know, our taxes are going up.
Yeah, either that or we have to find some place to park all the buses.
Well, interesting enough, there was a question because I read a little article, I think I may have sent it to somebody else. They've sent it on to Tower. That in New Canaan, they're looking to start the day later because a study said that young brains shouldn't be up that early. I'm gonna tell them I've always agreed with that, being a night owl, not a morning person.
Young and old brain.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, you know, and I loved real bankers hours.
it's really just high school, the sleep studies are talking about high
Yeah.
school.
Yeah,
high school.
This
Yeah,
stuff.
Yeah, because
school,
even
high
in high
school.
school's supposed to.
So-
Because
go
that's
later
when your brain
yeah.
like fluctuates, so it's not, the elementary kids are, they're up.
They're up anyway.
They're up
They're
from
up,
two
they
over.
could go to school at 6 o'clock.
I always thought that was upside down.
I did too. I was like,
Always
can't
thought
the
that was
elementary
upside
school
down.
kids go early?
Right,
So-
like 6.
So that being said, New Canaan is looking to implement that. And potentially that has, I don't have enough information, I can just relate what I read in the article. One of the individuals, I believe on their equivalent of the Board of Finance, was questioning what the union contract impact was because the hours were changing. And he was giving the estimate for the costs of buses, and New Canaan does get to park their buses, New Canaan appears to be spending more per bus than we are.
Really?
When, if that gentleman's calculations were correct of what it would be adding, and I looked at how many buses they were adding, it looked like, oh, this is interesting. So,
Longer routes?
who knows?
I don't know, your square miles.
Yeah.
More to come.
But, all right,
Gas
so.
is more expensive later in the morning, I don't know.
Surge price.
Surge price, right.
All right, just briefly, two more things, but you can be as unbrief as you want. Stacy and others testified today in Hartford. And so, you know, maybe you can give a little bit of your testimony, what Tara and what you were referring to us outside
Yeah.
the meeting.
So, some of you will remember from 3 years ago, there was potential for a bill to change the formula of excess cost reimbursement, and it would take into account a town's ability to pay. We were very vocal and participated in that conversation, and it didn't go anywhere. However, the CT Finance project, which is, I don't know, anyway, they're a task force consultant, whatever, and they never stopped working on it. And they did do some presentations around here a year and a half, 2 years ago that Tara Ackman, Taylor Carter, Jill McCammon went to, and I was told that a lot of other people went and voiced a lot of concern for this, what this bill was proposed on Wednesday. Basically they're proposing a co-op model where there's a list of people who would be on this board. It's not an elected official board, so therefore it doesn't have to abide by FOIA laws. The bill is long and it doesn't have a lot of information, but they're talking about this board would come up with the formula for excess cost reimbursement. They would tell us how much we're supposed to pay into this co-op, and then they would reimburse the towns for excess cost reimbursement. They say they can reimburse 100%, and then Julie pushed on the representative today and said, 100%? Really? Oh, okay. And he goes, well, 100% of the 72%. So,
up to 100% of what you're already getting.
yes.
Right.
But
So-
no, maybe, because
Maybe.
Darien would still have to pay for the expenses of these students.
Correct.
Right.
And then we would have to pay into the fund.
Correct.
And there is no guarantee that what we pay in, we're going to get back out.
Correct. So
Right, I mean, to me, that's the big bugaboo, because
Yes.
the pay-in is an equity adjustment basis. So I presume we're gonna pay a lot more, and maybe we'll get
Less.
74%, but we've had to put in more.
No, I would be
Yeah.
Yep.
off of that $5 million would cover the $500,000. So what I really think that Senator Duff should be doing is whatever investments they were doing, they should put into our pension plans,
Yeah.
because our pension plans are not performing at 10%,
Yeah.
and hence that it was just some more expenses. So when that's within the first couple of paragraphs, you can imagine what the rest of this bill is like.
It's a very vague bill, it gives very little detail, and the formula is unknown, because this board will come up with the formula. They can also change the formula if they want to, and there's an option to put in to consider a town's ability to pay into the formula.
So,
And they're appointed,
Now-
so like
Well,
there's
and there,
no
was
really
that was that
accountability.
thing from Clara with all, who can appoint to,
yeah,
that was astounding.
so,
Yes.
so now
Like everybody and
let's,
their brother can appoint their
Yeah.
own little,
Yeah.
so,
Except
Voter
for an
reapproval.
educator. An educator is not gonna sit on that board.
right, so if you
no
look at
special ed
this,
teachers go.
No.
Sounds like a
no.
Netflix special.
so if you also look at this, and some of the other concepts that they're talking about, apparently they want to resolve the unpredictability of what you're getting, because everybody puts things into a pool, submit their expenses, and then some percentage is given back to all of the participants of what's going on. That's an interesting concept, because even when I've taught budgeting for the American Management Association, it's not too difficult, since you're supposed to be tracking this, to estimate what your costs are. And if you're not happy with knowing whether or not it's 72 or 73%, you can drop it to 70%, and you're not going to have too much difficulty in calculating what it is. You have to calculate two numbers. What am I going to be spending that'll be over my amount, and what their reimbursement rate is? It's not a significant calculation. So they're looking to solve a problem that really isn't a problem.
That's right.
The real problem is, for the last 10 years, and Paul mentioned this, and he mentioned the right amount, for the last 10 to 15 years, the amount for reimbursement has remained at $140 million. So they have not increased the pool over the 10 years, while costs of teachers, educators, and professionals have gone up. They have periodically increased the education pool, or this pool, and interesting enough, it has always coincided when the governor was up for election. You can't make this up. I mean, I'm serious on that. So the real problem is that they have not increased the pool while costs have gone up. So at one time, there was a short period of time we were getting 100% reimbursement, but as more people participate, we're now down to 70 to 75%, someplace in that range. The other thing is that there is absolutely no controls that those communities that are going to be getting a larger 100% have to keep the money in education. So, one city mayor, who I'm not going to mention their name, has already said that if there was a change to this, they would include it in their budget, and that mayor would move the incremental reimbursement that they're getting out of the school budget increase and move it over to the city side. So effectively, what really happens here, and Dr. Brenner mentioned this, so I'm only reiterating what Dr. Brenner said, it's not my own personal opinion, is that for the schools that you're looking to help, they're not going to have any changes here because the money isn't increasing the educational spend dollar in those cities. However, what you're doing is taking it away from school districts that are meeting the requirements for their special ed students. However, when you're not getting reimbursement, it almost forces the districts to fight harder for what services they're willing to provide. And so, and that unpredictability becomes greater to these districts who have an ability to pay. But ultimately, what this bill does is potentially destroy special ed student services across the board. It does nothing to help the cities and communities that cannot offend, and it will force those who are providing services to relook at what they're doing to cover the burden. I personally, and I stated this when it came up 4 years ago, I believe that this is a federal, that if they were to implement this is a federal violation of students' rights, because they're treating those students as if they are different depending upon where they live. And that is against federal law. The special ed is really a civil rights bill. It is not an education bill. It's a civil rights bill, and the Supreme Court has substantiated that time in and time out. So, obviously, I am for all students getting appropriate services regardless of where they live, but I am vehemently against this bill.
So on Friday morning, the Board of Education, Council of Varying School Parents, RTM Education Committee, Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, we were there because I was there. We all got together to discuss how we were going to respond to this bill, and everybody really worked together, and the Board of Ed worked on a speech. Tara delivered a speech today. You know, thank you to Matt Blumenthal and Terry Wood, who helped us get to a place where we could come in, testify, and not spend all day there. So they were really great and helpful to us. Dr. Adley gave a testimony.
Do you want to, please comment on his.
Rich Rudel, at this Friday morning meeting, he's brought up something that I thought was really important. Dr. Adley stated it in his testimony that we've already tried a co-op model with health insurance, and it's running at a deficit. And I think that was really important. So Dr. Adley brought that up in his testimony today. The Board of Finance, I know, was working on a testimony to give. Mrs. Stevenson was working on a testimony to give. I'm not sure where Clara landed for RTM Education, but it was really nice. We all really came together and worked together on that with talking points and whose voice was gonna, anyway, so, yes, so I'm happy to share CDSP's testimony. Sarah and Julie, who are the co-chairs of the Council for Darien School Parents, gave a speech sort of talking about what our mission is and their thoughts on it, introduced me, and I spoke as the chair of the special ed subcommittee, and I really talked about our history in Darien, and that there was a time where there was some pressure put on the Board of Education special education budget, and it led to compliance, and it also led to division, where we really set special education students versus all other students, and it was not a good time. And so I talked about what we learned from that, and I pointed out where this bill has potential to do the same thing, and because all it does is talk about numbers, it doesn't talk about student outcomes. And you can't talk about education funding without talking about student outcomes. Dr. Adley Dr. Adley sort of echoed everybody, and he just had a bigger stick. And you could see when he walked in the room, he's very well respected in Hartford. He's known there. Jeff Curry, the representative from East Hartford, who co-signed this bill, is on the education committee, and he really challenged us and asked us a lot of questions, and Julie and Sarah really fielded most of it for us, and did a nice job with that. And he also challenged, he feels like we don't understand the bill. He feels like we're misunderstanding the bill. He has offered to come down here and speak to all of us. So I had an email from Matt Blumenthal and him to Sarah, Julie, and Tara and myself trying to figure out when he could come here and speak to everybody about this bill. So stay tuned.
Should I make sure it's not when I'm traveling?
I'm going to make sure that it's at a time that most people can come.
Yeah.
But Dr. Adley, he really challenged, and he said, you know, this isn't this. There's no accountability. There's no transparency. How are you predicting this? It's all online too. You can watch it if you want. But
he gave him a what to, from what I understand. Very, very openly and bluntly, and coming from somebody that they respect, still doesn't mean that they're going to change anything, but.
There was some support for it, but what was interesting was after we were done, the CAPS, which is the Connecticut Alliance of, it's a superintendent's,
Oh, yeah.
whatever. They said they didn't support it, and they had not heard from any superintendents who did support it, and they said there might be some, but we haven't heard from them. Oh yeah, the superintendent from South Windsor spoke. She was fantastic, and she was not supporting of it.
So I mean, again, it's really interesting that if the superintendents who are responsible for educating the Connecticut children are not in support because they don't perceive that this is solving either a problem or an issue that they currently have, that a group that has been operating outside decides that they're going to find an issue and potentially do more damage to the state. Because companies do move into this state based upon the education. And if certain things are indicating that special education is not as good as it should be, there may be executives of companies that choose not to move here and go to another state where it can be happening. I mean, you have to consider that, you know, executives that make these decisions are people too who have children, and not all of them are from Lake Wobegon.
Yeah, and Tara did a fantastic job as well. I don't know if I said that, but and they fielded questions. That theirs was more of a exchange. We had a little bit of exchange, but theirs was, Dr. Adley's and Tara's was more of an exchange and some pushback. And Julie Best did push back. She did a nice job. Anyway. It's good.
Any other comments? If not, we can do our minutes and end. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting? I see Beth, I see Stacy. Lisa isn't here, so.
We just made that easy for him.
Yes.
That was good. Well, that was very good. That was from the Guinness World Book of Records.
All in favor? Do I have a motion to adjourn? Done. Thank you all.